Silence is not absence, it is presence sharpened into a blade. In negotiation, words are the surface, but silence is the depth. When you refuse to fill the air, you force the other to drown in their own anxieties, their own confessions, their own eagerness to be heard. Silence unsettles because it cannot be interpreted easily, and men fear what they cannot read. Every word you speak costs leverage. Every silence you hold accrues it. To speak is to reveal. To remain silent is to conceal. Silence creates a void that compels the other side to act, to explain, to justify. They begin negotiating against themselves, offering more than you demanded, simply to escape the weight of what you did not say. Negotiation is not only the exchange of offers. It is a contest of nerves, a struggle of endurance. Those who rush to fill the void reveal their weakness. Those who hold silence display the calm of command. The longer you can withhold, the more the balance of power shifts toward you. In silence, you are not passive. You are sculpting the scene. You are shaping perception. You are controlling time itself. While they scramble to fill the emptiness, you are watching, calculating, stripping away illusions, exposing their need to resolve the discomfort. Silence is not retreat. It is an advance disguised as restraint. But silence must be wielded with precision. Too little, and it appears timid. Too much, and it turns into arrogance. The art lies in using silence as a pause, a deliberate interruption that unsettles but does not destroy the possibility of agreement. It is the difference between a dagger unsheathed and a dagger buried in the chest. Both are weapons, but one preserves the game. Silence reveals character. The impatient betray themselves. The arrogant overextend. The fearful seek approval. The wise wait. And in that waiting, the silent negotiator gathers truths without ever asking questions. What men reveal to fill silence is more honest than what they reveal under interrogation. To master silence is to master the unseen side of negotiation, the realm of psychology, instinct, and the invisible threads of dominance. It is to understand that sometimes the loudest statement is the one never spoken, because in the theater of power, words are arrows, but silence is the bow. And without the bow, no arrow has direction, no arrow has force. The silence gives meaning to the words, just as shadows give shape to light. So when you next sit at the table of bargaining, remember this. Silence is not emptiness. It is strategy. It is control. It is the sound of power holding its breath waiting for the other to break. Silence is the mirror that reflects desire more clearly than speech ever can. For in the uneasy quiet, a man reveals himself not through his crafted words, but through the tremors of his need. When you allow silence to linger, you uncover the fractures of another's resolve, the cracks in their armor that no argument could expose. In silence, hesitation grows louder than conviction, and the true measure of one's certainty is revealed not by what they claim, but by how quickly they rush to fill the void. Power in negotiation is never absolute. It is fluid, moving between those who can endure stillness and those who cannot. Silence forces time to work in your favor, because impatience is the most expensive weakness in any exchange. A man willing to wait has already conquered the man who cannot bear the pause. Every second of silence is a battlefield where nerves collide, where the one who blinks first concedes ground unseen. Words can be rehearsed, arguments can be planned, but silence tests what cannot be prepared for the naked endurance of the will. In politics and in war, silence has always been the language of control. Armies march to the drum, but it is in the stillness before the strike that fear takes its deepest root. Rulers have learned that silence can wound more than proclamations, that the absence of reply can feel like judgment, and that the unanswered question gnaws more than the sharpest insult. Silence denies the enemy clarity, and without clarity, his strength dissolves into confusion. A ruler who knows when to withhold words has in his possession a weapon rarer than eloquence, for silence cannot be misquoted, cannot be twisted, cannot be used against him. It is a fortress that protects more than it exposes. And yet, it is also an arrow, because silence itself can suggest meanings that the other side cannot resist inventing. The imagination of the opponent becomes the instrument of their undoing, as they project fears, doubts, and assumptions into the empty space you created. But silence is not the end. It is the interval, the pause before the decisive stroke. If left unshaped, silence turns into emptiness, and emptiness becomes weakness. The skilled negotiator does not remain silent to vanish, but to control the tempo, to dictate when the next word will strike. It is like drawing back the bowstring. The longer the pause, the greater the force when the release finally comes. To remain silent is to refuse to be rushed. To remain silent is to declare without words that you are not desperate. To remain silent is to communicate with cold precision that you will not be moved by impatience, by flattery, or by pressure. And in that refusal lies the essence of authority. Thus, silence in negotiation is not a withdrawal, but a command. It is the still water that conceals depth, the unreadable face that denies entry, the held breath that turns the entire room into a stage where others reveal themselves. Silence is strategy carved into time, a quiet blade pressed against the throat of those who mistake words for power. Silence unsettles because it shifts the burden of proof. The one who speaks first surrenders position. The one who explains reveals weakness. The one who justifies admits doubt. In negotiation, silence is the invisible hand that turns the opponent into his own accuser, compelling him to say more than he intended, to reveal more than he wished, to concede more than he realized. The more he speaks to fill the void, the more he entangles himself in his own words, while you stand untouched, guarded by the strength of what you do not reveal. Silence teaches patience, and patience is the foundation of power. The man who cannot endure silence will betray his own limits when pressed by it. He will overpromise, he will confess, he will seek reassurance where none is given. In those moments, silence is not passive. It is a test, a fire through which the other must walk, and many emerge scorched by their own inability to bear the heat. Silence allows you to see who is ruled by impulse and who has mastered restraint, and in this revelation, you discover the true hierarchy at the table. Every ruler, every commander, every diplomat who has understood silence has discovered its dual nature. It can be mercy, offering the opponent space to retreat with dignity. It can be cruelty, tightening the noose until his desperation exposes him. It can be calculation, stretching time until the advantage falls into your hands. It can even be disguise, concealing your own uncertainty behind a veil of composure until the moment arrives to strike. Silence contains multitudes, and its power lies in the ambiguity that words can never maintain. The theater of negotiation is not about truth, but about perception. A single pause, a well-placed silence, can alter the meaning of an entire dialogue. What is left unsaid carries the weight of menace or of promise, depending on how it is received. Men will imagine threats in your quiet or opportunities, depending on their fears and ambitions. Thus, silence makes them complicit in their own manipulation. They fill the void with their own desires and dreads, and you need only watch as they betray themselves to themselves. But silence is not invincible. Like all weapons, it must be tempered by measure. Silence without timing becomes impotence. Silence without intent becomes cowardice. Silence without eventual action becomes transparent. To master silence is not to withhold endlessly, but to wield it with precision, to know when to let it stretch like a blade in the dark and when to cut it short with decisive speech. For silence alone cannot close the deal, but silence can prepare the ground so that when you do speak, your words fall like iron, undeniable and final. And so, in the art of negotiation, silence is not emptiness but architecture. It is the scaffolding upon which power is built, the unseen structure that supports every move and countermove. It is the air between words that gives them force, the shadow that makes the light sharper, the stillness that magnifies every sound. To wield silence is to command the unseen currents of human nature, to turn time itself into an ally, to make others yield not because you forced them, but because they could not endure the weight of your restraint. Silence works because men are addicted to noise. They mistake constant speech for strength, when in truth it is weakness dressed as movement. The one who fears silence exposes his dependence on validation, his hunger for acknowledgement, his need to be affirmed by the sound of his own voice. In negotiation, that hunger is exploited. By withholding words, you deny him the satisfaction he craves, and in that denial he grows restless, reckless, and vulnerable. What he calls dialogue is often nothing more than an attempt to soothe himself. What you withhold is the comfort he cannot bear to lose. Silence is a mirror that does not flatter. It does not return the image men wish to see, but forces them to confront the one they try to conceal. In the stillness, they hear the tremor of their doubts, the whisper of their insecurities, the echo of their fears. They attempt to silence these inner voices with external noise, but when you remain unmoved, they have no shield left. They are laid bare, not by your attack, but by their own inability to live without reassurance. The most brutal confessions are rarely extracted by force. They are surrendered willingly into silence. To command silence is to command the battlefield of perception. Every pause is a maneuver, every withheld word a deployment of pressure. In war, the ambush waits in the quiet. In politics, the decision is shaped in the pause before the decree. Men who can wait possess the power to let their enemies crumble under their own weight. The weak demand resolution at once. The strong allow tension to ripen until the fruit falls without effort. Silence is not hesitation, it is patience weaponized. Yet silence also reveals discipline. A leader who remains silent when insulted demonstrates mastery over ego. A negotiator who withholds when tempted to boast reveals control over impulse. A ruler who resists the urge to explain his decisions shows that his authority does not depend on persuasion, but on the inevitability of command. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is the presence of authority, the signal that one does not answer to the rhythm of another's voice. But silence is never neutral. It carries the weight of intention whether you shape it or not. If you do not wield it with clarity, it will betray you. Too much silence, and you risk being read as indifferent, weak, or uncertain. Too little, and you squander its force. The art lies in the balance, silence long enough to disarm, brief enough to maintain control, timed so that when words finally come, they carry the full gravity of inevitability. Thus, silence in negotiation is not a void, but a strategy of dominance. It is the invisible chain around the opponent's throat, tightening with each word he spends unnecessarily. It is the measure of restraint that proves who controls the tempo of the game. And in a world where appearances decide outcomes, silence is the most eloquent display of strength, for it cannot be faked, cannot be borrowed, cannot be counterfeited. It is either endured or broken, and those who cannot endure it lose. Silence in negotiation is not merely the withholding of speech, but the reallocation of power. Each pause is a redirection of the current, forcing the other side to expend their energy while you conserve yours. The man who dominates silence dictates the tempo, and in any contest of will, tempo is as decisive as force. To rush is to be ruled by another's rhythm. To wait is to impose your own. Silence transforms time into an ally, stretching seconds into weapons that press upon the impatient and suffocate the unsteady. Silence unsettles because it is unreadable. Words can be challenged, argued against, refuted, but silence offers no surface for resistance. It is a void into which the other pours his interpretations, his fears, his desires, his guilt. In silence, men argue with themselves, crafting explanations that betray more than any interrogation could extract. A single glance held without reply, a pause maintained when an answer is expected, can fracture certainty and provoke concessions more swiftly than a torrent of logic. To use silence is to understand that negotiation is not a marketplace of facts, but a theater of perception. Men do not yield because truth compels them, but because pressure bends them. Silence is pressure distilled invisible yet unbearable. It is the tightening of the noose without visible movement, the advance of an unseen army whose presence is felt though not declared. The opponent feels it pressing against his skin, and to escape it, he offers more, concedes faster, bargains against himself, until silence has carved its victory without drawing blood. But silence is not an end, it is a means. If one remains silent without design, it turns from a weapon into a weakness. The silence must lead somewhere to a decisive word, to a precise strike, to the moment when the opponent is most vulnerable. Just as in battle, where the quiet before the charge amplifies the terror of impact, in negotiation the silence before the statement magnifies its weight. What is spoken after silence is not heard as mere speech, but as a decree, sharpened by the restraint that preceded it. Those who master silence possess an aura that cannot be taught by rhetoric. They appear calm, even when uncertain, unmovable, even when calculating, sovereign, even when cornered. For silence is sovereignty, the refusal to be compelled, the denial of urgency, the demonstration that one is not bound by the needs of others. To remain silent when provoked is to reveal that your power does not depend on their recognition, and nothing unsettles an opponent more than realizing that his words cannot touch you. Silence works because it is not emptiness but presence magnified. It is the presence of control, of patience, of calculation. It is the reminder that, in the theater of negotiation, victory belongs not to the one who speaks most, but to the one who can make his silence speak for him. And when silence finally breaks into words, those words fall with the weight of judgment, for they are not born of haste, but of command. Silence is the most disciplined ally a negotiator can command, for it demands mastery over the self before it can dominate another. To remain still when provoked, to withhold when tempted, to resist the impulse to defend or explain this, is to prove that you govern yourself first, and only then can you govern the exchange. The man who cannot master his own tongue cannot master the direction of the dialogue, and the man who cannot endure stillness cannot endure the burdens of power. Silence is not only a tactic against others, it is a training ground for the will. Every negotiation is a contest of endurance, and silence is the purest test of it. Those who lack inner composure treat silence as a vacuum that must be filled, but those who understand its essence know it is not emptiness, but space deliberately carved out to suffocate weakness. In that space, the impatient stumble, the insecure confess, the arrogant overreach. Silence is the stage where the true hierarchy emerges, where the strong are revealed by their ability to wait, and the weak are undone by their need to rush. To wield silence effectively is to understand its rhythm. It is not static, it moves like tides. At moments it should stretch, suffocating the opponent with unease, forcing him to fill it with words he will regret. At other moments it must be brief, sharp, a pause that sharpens the blade of your next statement. The rhythm of silence is the rhythm of dominance, unpredictable, unyielding, calculated to keep the other perpetually off balance. Silence also commands respect because it cannot be faked without conviction. Empty silence is quickly exposed, for it trembles, it shifts, it seeks rescue. But true silence is firm, unbending, unhurried, and it communicates authority more clearly than boasts or threats. In politics, as in negotiation, the one who can remain silent under attack appears invulnerable, for nothing reveals strength more than the refusal to be moved by provocation. The one who speaks less seems to know more. The one who withholds appears to control more. The one who does not answer dictates the terms on which he will eventually speak. This is why silence is feared. It forces others into confrontation not with you, but with themselves. They sit in the quiet you created, and in that quiet they hear their doubts echo louder than your voice ever could. They search your face for clues. They interpret your stillness as strategy. They imagine threats where none were spoken. They defeat themselves not because you spoke, but because you refuse to. Silence turns the battlefield inward, and men rarely emerge unscathed from wars against their own uncertainty. Thus, Silence in negotiation is not absence, but command. It is the quiet that speaks louder than persuasion, the pause that bends time to your advantage, the unseen pressure that forces movement without your hand. To speak wisely is power, but to remain silent wisely is greater power still, for silence needs no defense, no proof, no validation. It stands unassailable, and in its shadow, others yield. Silence bends the frame of the negotiation without appearing to touch it. While words can be resisted, countered, or dismissed, silence cannot be fought directly. It disorients because it denies the opponent a point of attack. They may prepare speeches, marshal evidence, and rehearse arguments, but none of these weapons can strike silence. It absorbs everything without reaction, and the more they struggle against it, the more they reveal the imbalance of their own position. In this way, silence is not a shield, but a void, and voids are dangerous because they consume the strength of those who rush to fill them. Silence does not broadcast intention, but it creates gravity. Men lean into it, compelled to close the gap, to explain themselves, to justify what requires no justification. Their need to interpret becomes their vulnerability, for in the act of interpreting they disclose their priorities, their fears, their impatience. You, by saying nothing, learn everything. They, by saying everything, learn nothing. And in that asymmetry, the negotiation tilts irreversibly in your favor. The silence of a leader in negotiation carries a weight that no argument can rival. It suggests calculation, it suggests knowledge withheld, it suggests confidence too great to require display. To remain silent in the face of pressure is to signal that you do not fear the consequences of delay, that you are not bound by the urgency of the other. This is why silence terrifies. It tells the opponent that you are prepared to endure longer than they are, and endurance is the essence of survival. Yet silence is not static. It must be punctuated with precision. When silence ends, it should end deliberately, with words placed like stones in a river, guiding the flow rather than being swept away by it. A single phrase after long silence carries more weight than entire speeches delivered without pause. The silence sharpens the word, gives it force, makes it memorable. What you finally say is heard not as one statement among many, but as the culmination of restraint, the unveiling of a decision long considered. The untrained mistake silence for passivity, but it is in fact the highest form of participation. It is listening without revealing, observing without exposing, commanding without declaring. It is the constant calculation of pressure, timing, and human weakness. To wield silence is to sit inside the very architecture of power, where every moment withheld becomes a lever that shifts the balance of the exchange. Thus, the strategy of silence is not merely effective, it is inevitable for anyone who seeks to rule the terms of negotiation. Words are necessary to seal agreements, but silence is what makes those words inevitable. To master silence is to master anticipation, to hold the room not with noise, but with the weight of what remains unsaid. And in a world where men fear uncertainty more than defeat, silence is the most ruthless certainty of all. Silence is the terrain on which hidden battles are fought, the battlefield where the mind wages war against itself. In negotiations, it is not the offer that unsettles, nor the demand, but the pause in which no answer comes. That pause stretches time, amplifies doubt, and forces the opponent to question not only what you want, but what you know. In the stillness, every unspoken possibility feels sharper than a spoken threat, for imagination always cuts deeper than fact. To understand silence is to understand control over perception. The opponent expects resistance, expects counter-arguments, expects words that can be measured and answered. When none come, he loses his footing. He begins to reveal what he had meant to conceal. He offers concessions unasked. He redefines his own position without pressure from you. He speaks to fill the void, but every word he spends in this way impoverishes his power. He is negotiating with shadows, while you remain unmoved, the shadow's creator. Silence is also a mask. Behind it, you may conceal fatigue, uncertainty, or calculation, but to the other side it appears as composure, as strength, as confidence. Few men can look at silence without projecting meaning onto it, and in that projection lies your advantage. Their interpretation becomes their trap. They imagine you immovable, so they shift. They imagine you displeased, so they appease. They imagine you indifferent, so they strive harder to please. By saying nothing, you make them tell themselves the story you need them to believe. But silence is most effective when paired with timing. If it comes too early, it risks appearing evasive. If it lingers too long, it hardens into obstinacy. Its true force lies in the pause that interrupts expectation, the moment just long enough to tilt the room into discomfort, but not long enough to fracture the negotiation entirely. Like a blade, its sharpness is lost without precision. The art lies not in silence itself, but in the deliberate way it is placed, so that when words finally arrive, they fall as though inevitable. Every silence carries within it a choice, to let the other side speak into weakness, or to end it with strength. The silence that lingers teaches patience. The silence that breaks teaches authority. A ruler who controls silence demonstrates mastery not only over others but over himself, for silence is discipline given form. In a world where most reveal themselves too quickly, too eagerly, the one who can wait commands the field without ever advancing a step. Thus, silence in negotiation is not emptiness, but power in its purest state. It is time made into a weapon, restraint forged into influence, uncertainty wielded as control. To speak is to risk, to remain silent is to compel, and the one who can compel without words has already won half the battle before the agreement is ever signed. Silence works because it forces the negotiation to orbit around you. The one who withholds words becomes the center of gravity, and the other is drawn into your orbit whether he wills it or not. Every sentence he utters circles the void you have created. Every justification bends toward the silence you maintain. He cannot escape it, because silence is not nothing. It is the stage upon which his own uncertainty performs. The more he tries to resist it, the more he is captured by it, until he begins to negotiate not with you, but with the silence itself. Silence is the slow tightening of the rope, unseen yet undeniable. It creates the sense that you know more than you reveal, that you are measuring every word he speaks while revealing none of your own. He begins to feel exposed, as though every confession is magnified in the absence of reply. This is the paradox of silence. It strips away his armor without you lifting a hand. He arms himself with words, but those very words betray him, and the more he reaches for protection, the more vulnerable he becomes. Silence also punishes arrogance. The man who believes his eloquence will command the room finds himself speaking into an abyss, his finest rhetoric swallowed by the refusal to acknowledge it. The applause he expected never arrives. The recognition he demanded is denied, and in that denial, his power collapses. He may continue speaking, louder, faster, desperate for a reaction, but silence reduces every flourish to desperation. The silent negotiator needs no triumph, for the opponent's unraveling is victory enough. Yet silence must be more than endurance. To simply remain mute without intention is to drift. True silence is deliberate, calculated, and aligned with strategy. It is the pause that draws confession, the stillness that deepens tension, the restraint that builds expectation. And when it ends, it must end with precision, words chosen like arrows loosed from a bow drawn to its full measure. After silence, speech is never casual. It is decisive, final, the cutting edge that delivers what the quiet prepared. This is why silence belongs to those who understand both power and patience. The impatient expose themselves because they cannot wait for silence to work. The fearful abandon it because they cannot bear its weight. Only the disciplined can wield it, for they know that silence is not weakness, but command, the command of time, of perception, of the very rhythm of the exchange. He who governs silence governs the unseen currents of the negotiation, and he who governs those currents governs the outcome. Thus, silence is not absence but force concealed, not retreat but encirclement, not weakness but control. It is the strategy of those who know that in every contest of power, the greatest victories are not shouted but imposed quietly, in the space where words fail and will alone decides who endures. Silence is the discipline that transforms the table into a battlefield without noise, where each second of withheld speech becomes a maneuver and each pause is an act of encirclement. The other side often mistakes the quiet as hesitation, but in truth it is the sharpening of the blade. The negotiator who holds his tongue is not retreating but calculating, letting the opponent's impatience corrode his position until surrender comes dressed as generosity. This is why silence is feared. It does not reveal its hand, it does not display its weapons, yet it advances with invisible pressure. To endure silence is to demonstrate sovereignty over one's own impulses. Most men cannot sit within it without betraying themselves, for silence provokes a primal discomfort, a reminder that they are no longer in command of the tempo. They long to escape it by speaking, yet in speaking they yield. Their words become tribute offered to the quiet, and with each concession they grow lighter, weaker, more exposed. Silence feeds on their unease, and what begins as a pause ends as domination. The ruler understands that silence is also a mask. Behind it he may hide doubt or weakness or even ignorance, yet to those who face it, the mask appears as composure, certainty, and depth. Men project strength onto silence because they cannot endure the thought that it may conceal nothing. They would rather believe you are unshakable than confront the terror of the unknown. Thus, silence allows you to trade weakness for strength simply by refusing to show your hand. Yet silence must not be endless. It is not the final act, but the preparation for it. A bow held taut forever will lose its force. Silence stretched without release turns from menace into inertia. Its purpose is to condition the room, to heighten expectation, to bend attention until every ear strains for the word you will eventually speak. And when that word comes, it lands with a weight, magnified by the silence that preceded it, carrying an authority disproportionate to its length. The true mastery of silence lies in its rhythm, its measure, its ability to be both absence and presence, both shield and sword. To fall into silence carelessly is to risk being read as uncertain. To wield it deliberately is to turn uncertainty into leverage. In this lies the paradox of power. The strongest move is sometimes to make none. The most commanding word is sometimes no word at all. Thus, the strategy of silence is not merely useful, it is essential. It is the quiet that holds the room, the stillness that dictates tempo, the void into which others pour their weakness. It is the weapon of those who understand that in the game of negotiation, it is not always the loudest voice that triumphs, but the one who can make silence itself speak. Silence reshapes the very air of negotiation, turning the space between words into a theater of unease where the opponent performs for you without knowing it. In that performance, every glance, every shift of tone, every hurried justification becomes evidence, and you collect it without effort. The silence you impose becomes a net, and the more they struggle to fill it, the tighter it binds. They believe they are advancing their position, but in truth they are giving you the raw material of their surrender. Silence also establishes hierarchy. The one who waits commands the one who cannot, just as the soldier who holds formation commands the panicked crowd that breaks rank. In the stillness, the impatient reveal their dependence on resolution, while the silent declare their freedom from it. To endure without speaking is to demonstrate that you are not bound by the urgency of others, that you can outlast discomfort, that your position does not require immediate validation. Such restraint carries an aura of inevitability, and inevitability is one of the strongest forms of power. Every pause is a weapon of interpretation. The other side will search for meaning in your silence, imagining signals that you never sent, threats that you never spoke, concessions that you never offered. In their desperation to decode the quiet, they reveal more than they intended, they concede more than they needed, and they weaken themselves through their own projections. Silence thus becomes not only a shield but a mirror, reflecting back the opponent's hidden doubts amplifying his own internal divisions until they do your work for you. The discipline of silence is rare because it requires victory over the self before victory over others. To resist the urge to explain, to reject the need for immediate reply, to deny the temptation of one more argument, this is harder than any verbal duel. It demands that you treat time as an ally, not as an enemy, that you endure the discomfort others cannot, and that you trust pressure to work silently on your behalf. To master silence is therefore to prove mastery not only of strategy, but of will. But silence is not a void that lasts forever. It is a bow drawn back, storing force in its restraint. When finally released, the word that follows silence strikes with amplified weight, for it is not just the content of the word that matters, but the anticipation built around it. A single phrase after long silence carries the gravity of a judgment, a verdict delivered by one who had no need to rush. Silence gives words their sharpness, just as shadows give fire its glow. Thus, silence in negotiation is not the absence of speech, but the highest form of speech. Speech distilled to its essence, speech transformed into presence. It is the architecture that shapes perception, the rhythm that controls time, the pressure that bends will. To wield silence is to command without declaring, to influence without exposing, to win not through the volume of one's voice, but through the discipline of restraint. It is the strategy that requires nothing yet gains everything, the quiet edge of power that cuts deepest where no sound is heard. Silence is not weakness, but the refusal to squander strength. Every word spoken is a disclosure, every argument a fragment of positions surrendered. The one who speaks least concedes least, for silence leaks nothing and conceals everything. This is why seasoned rulers and negotiators do not rush to answer. They let silence grow, knowing it forces the other to expose himself in ways no interrogation could compel. Words can be polished and prepared, but silence forces the truth to stumble out unguarded. Silence operates as both mask and weapon. It hides intent behind an impassive surface while cutting deeper than visible force. The other side cannot tell if your quiet is patience or disdain, calculation or contempt. They project their fears onto the void, and in that projection, you gain leverage. For men fear the unseen more than the declared. A spoken threat can be measured, but silence suggests possibilities too vast to calculate, and fear swells to fill that uncertainty. To use silence is to bend time itself. Most negotiations are lost because of impatience, the hunger to resolve, the discomfort with tension, the desire to close. But silence stretches the moment, transforms urgency into endurance, and makes time your ally rather than your enemy. The man who can wait is already master of the one who cannot. In the stillness, pressure accumulates, not on the one who withholds, but on the one who seeks escape. Silence does not passively allow time to move. It weaponizes time, forcing the opponent to feel its weight. There is also dignity in silence. To refrain from answering trivial accusations, to deny the satisfaction of reaction, to remain unmoved when provoked, this projects strength more convincingly than the sharpest retort. The world respects restraint because it is so rare, and it reads silence as evidence of control. Even when silence conceals doubt, it appears to others as certainty, and appearances, in politics as in negotiation, carry the force of truth. But silence must serve design. It cannot be endless, for endless silence paralyzes the game and hardens into stalemate. Its purpose is to magnify the moment of speech, to prepare the ground so that when words finally arrive, they land with precision and authority. Silence without conclusion is wasted. Silence leading to decisive articulation is mastery. The quiet must break like a storm, sudden and unanswerable, transforming anticipation into impact. Thus, silence is not the absence of action, but its most disciplined form. It gathers power, reshapes perception, bends time, and forces the other to reveal himself. To master silence is to hold command without motion, to dictate outcomes without appearing to move the board. It is the essence of negotiation's hidden warfare, the unspoken weapon that subdues not by force of argument, but by the weight of restraint. In silence, the strongest voice is heard, the one that speaks only when it chooses and never when compelled. Silence unsettles because it cannot be bought or persuaded. It is a form of resistance that costs nothing, yet demands everything from the one facing it. The opponent may raise his voice, sweeten his offers, threaten or flatter, but the silent figure does not yield. In that refusal to respond, the balance of power tilts, for he who does not need to speak cannot be controlled. Silence is sovereignty over the tongue, and sovereignty over the tongue is sovereignty over the field. To sit in silence is to place the other in captivity without chains. He will begin to pace, to fill the air with words, to attempt to unlock what is not locked. Each sentence he adds becomes another layer of exposure, another admission disguised as confidence. The man who cannot bear silence will give you the truth you never asked for, and he will do so willingly, as though compelled by forces outside himself. This is the paradox. Silence frees you from the burden of interrogation, for men interrogate themselves when left alone in its presence. But silence is not merely a tactic of concealment. It is a declaration of control. By withholding, you assert that you set the rhythm, that nothing will move until you allow it. The opponent is forced to orbit around your quiet, adjusting his position, reshaping his arguments, surrendering his certainty to fit within the frame you created. In this way, silence is not absence, but command, the invisible hand that arranges the negotiation without appearing to touch it. Silence also teaches the ruler how to see. When the noise of speech subsides, the subtler signs emerge: the flicker of doubt in the eyes, the restless shift of posture, the tremor in the voice that betrays more than words. These are signals often drowned in conversation, but silence clears the air until every movement speaks louder than dialogue. The skilled negotiator reads what is not said and answers not with words but with deeper silence, pressing until the truth is dragged out unbidden. Still, silence must be measured like any weapon. Too brief, and it loses force. Too prolonged, and it turns into hostility that closes the path to agreement. The art is in the calibration, to let silence stretch to the point of discomfort, but not collapse into alienation. A silence well kept is remembered, but a silence misused breeds resentment. Power requires not only the ability to withhold, but the wisdom to release, to know when the stillness has achieved its purpose and when the word must finally strike. Thus, silence in negotiation is not the void of inaction, but the architecture of strategy. It is the unseen structure that bends the opponent's will, the patient force that breaks resistance without battle, the quiet dominion that governs without decree. To command silence is to command the unseen currents that move men, and he who commands those currents shapes not only the outcome of the negotiation, but the perception of power itself. Silence is the unseen ally of those who understand that words, once spoken, can never be taken back, while silence can be broken at any time with precision. To hold silence is to preserve possibility, to keep every option alive while the other narrows his own through speech. He binds himself with commitments, admissions, and explanations, while you remain unbound, free to shape your move at the moment of greatest advantage. In silence, you lose nothing, yet you gain the measure of the other. Silence is also a test of loyalty. When you remain quiet, you see who feels compelled to speak on your behalf, who grows uneasy without direction, who reveals his insecurity by rushing to fill the void. The impatient ally exposes himself as unreliable, for he cannot endure uncertainty. The rival exposes his ambition by trying to seize control of the silence. And the true subordinate shows his strength by holding the line, waiting, reflecting the discipline you yourself display. Thus, silence does not only shape negotiation, it sorts men, dividing those you can trust from those you must watch. Silence reveals what words conceal. In conversation, men can disguise their intent with eloquence, but when denied a response, they stumble into truth. They overexploit their arguments, return again to the same point, repeat themselves until their real fear is exposed. The mask slips not because you tore it away, but because they could not bear the weight of keeping it on without acknowledgement. Silence is the crucible that melts pretense into confession, but silence must never be mistaken for indifference. True silence is alive with pressure, pulsing with intent. It is not the silence of absence, but of presence held in reserve. The air thickens with it, the room bends toward it, and the opponent cannot escape its pull. Indifference breeds weakness, but deliberate silence breeds strength, for it signals that you could act but choose not to, that you are not compelled by their urgency, that your will governs the pace of the exchange. The one who wields silence wisely knows that it is not an endless refuge, but a calculated interval. It is the space in which doubt grows, tension builds, and the opponent weakens himself. But when the silence has done its work, it must give way to action, a word, a demand, a decision. The contrast between the stillness and the sudden strike gives the move its power, like the release of a trap long set. Silence alone unsettles, but silence followed by precision conquers. Thus, silence in negotiation is the unseen hand that bends outcomes before words are ever spoken. It is restraint turned into influence, time turned into pressure, uncertainty turned into control. To master silence is to master not only what you say, but what you refuse to say, and in that refusal lies a form of command that no speech, however eloquent, can rival. In silence, the architecture of power is revealed, and only those who can endure it may truly govern. Silence is the proof of discipline, and discipline is the proof of strength. In negotiation, the one who cannot resist the urge to fill silence reveals that he is a servant to his own anxiety. He fears the unknown, he fears the weight of stillness, and so he rushes to strip it away with words. But the one who sits calmly within silence shows that he is master of himself, and mastery of the self always precedes mastery of others. The battle is often won not by eloquence but by the ability to endure what the other cannot. Silence is also a weapon of delay. Many concessions are born not of reason but of impatience. When the silence stretches, men begin to feel that movement must occur, that progress must be shown, that something must be given to prove the dialogue is alive. They offer compromises to break the tension, not realizing that their concessions are the price of their own discomfort. You need not demand, they will give. You need not argue, they will persuade themselves. Silence compels them to act against themselves while you remain unmoved. At the heart of silence lies ambiguity, and ambiguity is a form of dominance. Clear words can be countered, but silence denies clarity. It forces others to question. Are you calculating? Are you displeased? Are you preparing to strike? Are you indifferent? In their attempts to answer these questions, they expose the state of their mind, and in doing so, they surrender the advantage of concealment. Silence unmasks others precisely because it refuses to unmask itself. Silence is also a rehearsal of power. In politics, as in war, the strongest rulers do not reveal their plans until the moment of execution. Their silence is not the silence of emptiness, but of preparation. By refusing to speak, they create a theater where expectation builds, where fear multiplies, where loyalty is tested, and when they finally act, the force is magnified by the anticipation that preceded it. Silence is the gathering storm. The word that follows is the lightning strike. Yet silence is not only strategy but survival. In dangerous courts and fragile alliances, a single word spoken too freely can unravel an entire position. Silence protects the ruler from his own tongue, shields him from betrayal, preserves the ambiguity that keeps enemies cautious and allies dependent. To remain silent is to deny others the weapon of your words. What you never say can never be used against you, while what you withhold can always be reshaped to fit the circumstances of tomorrow. Thus, silence is not inaction, but the highest form of calculated action. It is patience sharpened into pressure, ambiguity sculpted into advantage, time forged into a weapon. It is the art of saying nothing while compelling everything, of standing still while drawing others into movement. To master silence is to sit at the center of negotiation like a sovereign, letting the restless expend themselves, while you, unmoved, hold dominion through the quiet weight of restraint. Silence in the end is not absence, but the purest form of command. It is the unseen architecture of influence, the still gravity around which every restless voice turns. Those who cannot endure it expose themselves, those who fear it betray themselves, and those who seek to break it surrender more than they ever intended. To rule with silence is to rule without waste, to wield the sharpest weapon without drawing it, to hold the field not by force of noise but by the weight of restraint. In negotiation, the one who governs silence governs time, and the one who governs time governs outcome. For words will fade, arguments will be forgotten, but the memory of silence endures, carrying with it the presence of authority that needs no defense. Speak when the moment demands, but until then, let silence be the fortress of your strength and the mask of your intent. Because in the final measure, silence is not merely a tactic, it is the sovereign posture of power itself, the calm shadow that bends others to your will, the quiet reminder that the strongest command is often the one never spoken.